Hey guys, today we'll take a look at some tips and tricks for Elden Ring Nightreign. There are some mistakes that I see people doing constantly, and a few of them I've been guilty of myself. So without further ado, let's jump right in it. At number 1, you're going to want to prioritize XP more than anything. The more you level up, the more survivability you get, the more damage you deal, and the more higher level gear you can equip. And just to give you an example, defeating only the first camp of a handful of enemies and then securing those runes at a nearby site of grace already bumps you to level 3 or 4, and as you can see, even that measly HP already jumps to some respectable levels. And by the time you hit the Night 1 boss, I recommend having around level 7 to 8, and for the second Night boss, I recommend somewhere around level 10 to 12, as that's going to give you enough headroom in terms of damage and survivability. And on that note, if you happen to drop on this part of the island down south at the very first camp, I recommend keeping an eye out for this opening into the ground. If you drop below, you should find a whole bunch of very useful items. Again, even if you don't plan to use some of these weapons, pay attention to the third passive over there at the bottom, as oftentimes it may be useful. So maybe you find a catalyst, even if you don't plan to use it, it may have something like damage reduction or extra damage with two-handed and so on and so forth. But pay extra attention to the Fire Prelate boss right here in the middle room. This is going to be a very easy encounter that gives you quite a ton of XP and your first set of very powerful upgrades. It's very easy even as solo, just back and forth when it's telegraphing its attacks, and once you do so, you're going to get a bunch of XP, but also your very first selection of upgrades. Now in this case, you may get a dormant power or a weapon of rare or higher quality. Most of the times these weapons can be very good. Like for example, I got Flame of the Redmanes on the Fire Star Fist here, which can actually be very strong, but there are others in there too. Also make sure that you don't forget you can now level up at the site of grace, so always try to activate those. Now from this point on, what I really enjoy doing is always heading over further down west here by the lake area, as there are 3 important things we can get from here. So one of them is if we drop down to the left side of the church, we should always see a roller beetle. And whenever you encounter a beetle, always try to destroy it because they drop trinkets. In this case, I got a Taker's Cameo, which is actually really useful, but you can obviously get other options in there too. So always try to destroy beetles when you encounter them. Besides that, we're also going to go inside of the church. You likely saw your teammates doing that often. Every time you find a church, always go inside because it's going to feature one of these altars and you can increase your maximum potion capacity by interacting with it. Trust me, you will definitely need it, especially as you progress into the night boss areas. Now, from this point on, the third and final thing we need from the area is Greyol, or, well, in this case, the Flying Dragon of the Hills. This is actually a very easy boss encounter even for a level 3 to 4, especially if you play with your full team. That is why I recommended constantly sticking together. In this case, it shouldn't take too long for that to happen, and this is going to be one of the first major bosses that you can defeat. It's going to give you a whole bunch of XP, and more often than not, it's going to give you some very strong dormant powers. So in my case, I more often than not see it with epic gear and also some very strong upgrades. For example, if you manage to get the periodical giant glint blade, definitely take it. It's absolutely bonkers how good that is. Now from this point on, you're going to go ahead and scout for more areas with bosses and enemies to defeat. The bigger the area, the better, because you can level up faster. So in this case, whenever you see something like a big castle with some enemies from above shooting you below, pay attention behind the castle. Typically, there's going to be one of these streams that can be used to basically get at the top of it much quicker. And in this case, you can take down that boss also very fast. So I recommend always paying attention to any extra boss because of those dormant powers that you can get. Remember, dormant powers are not shared. These belong to you. So if you have to stay for like 20 seconds to see which of those upgrades is best for you, do it. Nobody can steal it from here. That only happens with the items that drop in the open world. Now, besides that, while we're still on the subject, the next tip is to always destroy the boss as well as all of its adds in any boss encounter, as that's how you're going to finish that particular encounter. Let me give you an example. We just destroyed this flower boss, but one of the adds was still remaining. My teammate didn't know that, so he just went away thinking that the boss bugged and he missed out on a bunch of very strong upgrades. In this case, what we needed to do is just destroy this other plant here in the back. And lo and behold, it spawns that set of upgrades you can go ahead and take right away. And in my case, I got the Royal Greatsword, which is absolutely busted. And this is just one example, by the way. There are many encounters that feature one singular HP bar, but it's actually a whole encounter made out of multiple enemies. And only when you defeat every single one of those enemies is when that encounter is over and you can get your dormant powers. Moving on, the next thing you should pay attention to is some of these vendors. You likely encountered them in your journeys. They do sell some very powerful items every now and then, but in exchange of runes. However, pay attention to what's next to them, because you can actually make weapon upgrades at him. In this case, you're going to need smithing stones, so whenever you open up chests, pay attention to all the droppable consumables, because one of them may be the elusive smithing stone, and this can be very, very good. Just to show you an example, if I were to have one right here, I could turn my magma worm scale sword from epic all the way to legendary, which gives me a massive boost to attack damage. So that would have been very useful, but at this stage I did not have one. That is why always open every chest, every single glowing and glistening thing, as you might get one of those or some other useful items on top. Moving on to the next tip, you should pay attention and always open up lighthouses, as that is another very good source of extra dormant powers for free. You just have to complete a quick puzzle, which typically is to destroy a small little, I guess, shield on the ground in one of the bushes next to it, or interacting with an object right in front of the stairs. These are typically way easier than the ones in the base game. But if you jump right here into the middle of this section and then just navigate the platforming all the way at the top, you're going to find a room with another set of dormant powers, again on a similar level to that of bosses, so it's absolutely always worth it to check these out. And with all of this exploration, chances are that eventually the fourth night circle will catch up to you. Well, guess what? It really doesn't matter that much, as long as you know what you're doing. I mean, the damage on that, as you can see, is very, very manageable, even on day 2, to the point that you can stay in camps and still farm for a pretty long period of time, which you can definitely make use of. It takes about 1 or 2 minutes for your full HP to actually run down, and if you still have like 1 or 2 HP flasks left, you can easily heal through all of that. Furthermore, I also recommend going at Sites of Grace on the way so that you can replenish your full HP and all of your healing flasks, so you can stay and farm for an extra minute or 2, which can actually bring you a huge difference in XP, items, and basically levels. Now, if you do happen to run out of time or just want to make your way towards the other side of the island very quickly, what you can do is use some of these blue spectral trees. If you pay attention to the map, you will even see the outlines, these white lines that basically give you the trajectory of where you're going to be heading towards. And in this case, this bird is controllable. As you can see, we can both descend with it or even drop down from it if we want to, which means we can control where we actually drop. So this is going to be a nice way to fast track your way towards the opposite side of the island, farm some more over there, or just escape the Fortnite circle. But eventually you should reach day number 2. The first boss day is not really that difficult. The only thing I recommend doing is paying attention to the smaller ad right here. This is going to be the one that deals most damage. It's also very elusive, but if you catch it in permanent stun locks, like, it's very easy to poise break this guy and very easy to take him down if everybody focuses on him. The bigger one is not going to be that challenging, as it only has a couple of spells that it casts. Similarly, in the case of the boss that splits into centipedes, you can just go ham at it and be careful at its dive bomb. And when it actually splits into other bosses, again, just focus on the main body. It doesn't really matter, and you can take it down relatively quickly. But in day number 2, you will have a chance, sometimes very high actually, to get invaded by Morgoth. In this case, it's called Foul Omen. Well, it has the same abilities as Morgoth, the Omen King, back in Elden Ring, and maybe even some extra abilities that are even stronger than that. But in terms of the strategy, it's very similar to that in the first game. So when it's about to reach the second phase and cast all of those swords from the sky, if you stun lock him right away, which you should do, you can definitely interrupt all of that and follow up with some crazy damage. Like, if you happen to be right in front of him as he's about to cast that, don't run, stay there and try to poise break him right away. But if you do manage to defeat him, he's going to give you a pretty awesome permanent buff, which increases the charging speed of your ultimate arts gauge, so you can spam your ultimate abilities much sooner, which is going to be very helpful in the fights ahead, especially the Night 2 boss. Anyway, on a final note, here's a few extra tips and tricks that didn't make it to their own categories. First of all, always revive your teammates when they're fallen, hit them a few times, and that should pretty much put them back on their feet but do keep in mind that every time you fall in battle again, it's going to take significantly more hits to get revived again, so make sure that you run away. But getting downed and revived can be a good method to recuperate some HP if you're already low and with no flasks. If you revive, you're going to be brought back to at least half HP. Second of all, if you happen to be left without any extra potions, you can use the raw fruits and also some of these blue fields with the butterflies on them to regenerate your HP and your FP respectively. There's also some lanterns, I believe, that also heal you up, but those are a bit more rare. Besides that, also pay attention to the glowing red bodies. These are going to give you even more chances at better loot. Typically, the loot on these is better than the ones in the white chests, so it's always worth paying attention to them. Another one is that you should not be afraid to pick weapons that you don't use. Like I said before, the passive skills count towards your whole build. So even if you don't plan to use those weapons, the passives on them can definitely make a huge difference. Besides that, also make sure that you follow character archetypes. Yes, as much as you cannot see any of your stats, classes still seem very much oriented towards their dominating stats. So for example, the Wilder seems to favor strength a lot, and in the case of the Recluse, it seems to benefit a lot from intelligence scaling. So for example, Lion's Claw was really great on the Wilder, but magic spells seem to always deal the highest damage on the Recluse, unless we're talking about abilities that scale with the weapon itself. So yeah, still use weapons that are suited for that character archetype. And if you don't know which one that is, you can simply go to the sparring area at the roundtable hold and test everything out. You can spawn all of the weapons in the game right here from this side tent, and there's also a bunch of target dummies you can see the damage on when you attack them. And besides that, you also have a living target dummy that you can activate so you can take down. So this is going to be very helpful, plus you have the menu that lets you regenerate your FP, HP, and also influence your levels. And with this, you should be golden. It's not really that difficult, but keep in mind this is just the first of the 8 expeditions that the game will launch with, as well as only 4 of the 8 classes that we're going to have, and presumably maybe a bit more than that. But for now, this is pretty much it. Thanks much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.